Hi, my name is Sir Jocelyn Achard. I am currently living in Portland, Maine. I am previously from the Kingdom of the Desert Winds in Amtgard, and this is a Court Garb 101 class. I have left a link for the handout to this class in the chat on the Zoom meeting here, and I'll try to remember to link the handout anywhere else I post this class. As I'm mostly going to be trying to avoid reading the handout in this class, as you all can do that on your own. So the first topic that I go over is basically what is court garb. Court garb, the general definition is just anything that's too fancy to wear fighting. And this can be due to either the expense of the material or the fit, or if it's just too cumbersome to fight in. Anything that is fancier than everyday wear is technically court garb. This can run the gambit from full-blown ball gowns to doublets that are just too warm and heavy material to fight on the field without, passing out. So court garb is very, very broad, and it's really all about just looking how you want to look and feeling fancy and showing off. The best place to get started is just finding your inspiration. I personally use Pinterest a lot for visual inspiration, but Google is just as good, or anywhere else that you're going to be looking for images that offer inspiration and design and get your creative juices going. Some of the standard search terms to use if you're not really sure where to start would just be actually Googling court garb, because there are definitely enough LARPers posting pictures of their work online that will bring up court garb that other people have been making. You can also definitely look up inspiration from movies and TV shows that you like the costuming of. Some that definitely fit within the Amtgard sphere of style would be shows like Merlin, or movies like the Lord of the Rings trilogies. Anything with sort of a swords and sorcery, historical, pre-1600 background. Most of the costuming, there's going to be something in there that you can look at and go, ooh, I want to try doing it like that. If you want to actually create, specifically recreate a piece of costuming that you've seen elsewhere, that falls more under cosplay. What I've been talking about with the design and inspiration is more about finding a specific element of a costume that you see and going, oh, I would like to incorporate that into my outfit. Maybe it's a specific kind of fabric, maybe it's a specific cut for a skirt, or a certain way that sleeves are attached to a doublet for a guy. You don't have to look at a costume and go, I'm going to make that. You can look at a costume and go, okay, that specific element of that part of that costume is something that I would like to recreate for myself. If you are more of a book kind of person, there are definitely books that you can get to help with the design and inspiration for garb. This is one of my favorites. It's called The Medieval Tailor's Assistant, and it's a great place for getting started, even if you're just making field garb, because what it does is it has all kinds of really detailed information on different historical kinds of clothing, and it actually breaks it down into patterns that you can size up or size down or change the ratios of so that it fits your body type. It's a really good hands-on starting place book. But if you're more advanced, if you're past basics, you can always get more in-depth books written for the modern world, like the Costume Technician's Handbook and others. And they're going to cover a broad range. It's obviously not all going to be appropriate for Amtgard with the medieval Renaissance swords and sorcery sort of theme. But there's going to be a lot of information in those kind of books about design and fit and theme and construction and patterning and all of that kind of stuff. But you don't have to get books. Pinterest and Google work great. Let's see. So the first consideration with garb, it is generally fabric. Fabric is going to have a lot of influence on the garb that you're making. much, much more than just how it's going to look from, 50 feet away. Some of the things to consider when choosing fabric includes its appearance, obviously. Fabric can do a lot by itself without needing to add a lot of embellishment. And in fact, if you're using a really fancy fabric, like this from my nighting gown, it's a pattern crushed velvet. And there's already a lot going on in this fabric, so I opted to not really embellish it much more because the fabric itself is already kind of a statement in its own right. Another example would be like sari fabric. This is the skirt of a dress I made out of a sari, and it's got the gold woven patterning along the edge. So I just used the fabric with the fanciness that was already built into it. Same with this one, rather than adding anything to it, which saves a lot of time and effort if you're just using the fabric to be the fanciness that makes it court garb. One of the other considerations with fabric is its purpose. For example, lightweight fabrics, they're going to be flowy and you can gather a lot of material into a small space to make things look very billowy and poofy. Whereas if you're using a heavier fabric like a brocade or a canvas or anything like that, you're gonna do much better with having very smooth, clean, precise shaping where there isn't a lot of excess fabric that's trying to do anything other than sit exactly where you put it. Some of the examples that I have here that I wanted to show people, and I'm gonna try to use my light to make up for the fact that you aren't actually here. Silk is definitely a very fine fabric. You can get thicker silks, but even the thicker silks are going to drape really, really nicely and have a lot of air in it. It's not going to hold structure very well if you're doing doublets or structured bodices. You're going to want to reinforce any silk that you're using because the silk itself is not going to hold up to wear very well at all. One of the other fabrics that's becoming thankfully more popular in Amtgard, because I'm a huge fan of it, is linen. Linen is a natural fiber fabric made from a flax plant, and it comes in a variety of weights. This one is sort of standard. Linen is a beautiful, beautiful thing, mostly because of how it deals with moisture wicking. If you're making court garb for hot climates, or field garb, linen is great as a temperature regulator. Synthetics, specifically nylons and polyesters, will insulate. They don't dissipate moisture and heat very well, so you tend to get kind of the feeling that you're living in an oven. But linen is really, really, really nice for wicking the moisture away from your body and allowing it to evaporate, which actively cools you off. And even if you're like way deep into court garb and you're making Tudor garments where you've got your chemise and your petticoat and your kirtle and then your overgown, if you're using natural materials, especially linen, you're not going to overheat nearly as much or as quickly as if you're using synthetics of any kind. So linen is great. Wool is also definitely an option. It tends to be fairly cost prohibitive even for serious garbers, but I still want to touch on it because a lot of people really misunderstand wool. Most people, when I talk about wool, they're assuming I'm talking about this kind of wool. This is a, it's not felted, fold wool, where it's really thick and you can kind of imagine it being used to make like heavy cloaks or jackets or anything that's really, really warm. And it is great for that, and it's waterproof, and it's delightful to use for cloaks and stuff, but it doesn't have to be. Wool can also be really fine, like this. I think this is a 2 twill gabardine wool. Tropical weight or light suiting weight can be really, really nice. I have a green wool dress that I wear sometimes, and it is entirely wool, and it's a tropical weight, and it is delightful. I've worn it in Texas in July outdoors for an entire weekend, and I was fine. So don't assume wool has to be hot. It does not have to be. And it's, oh my gosh, the drape. the drape of wool is just so luxuriant. I love it. All right. Yeah, so that's sort of basics on materials for fiber content. One of the other things you want to make sure you're bearing in mind when you're picking fabric is how the material is going to be to work with. This is that patterned blue crush pane velvet that I showed the dress of earlier. And this fabric is stretchy. It's synthetic, probably polyester, and it's got stretch in all four directions on the grain and on the bias. And the surface is very napped. You can actually have the grain of the velvet. And this fabric was an absolute nightmare to work with. So when you're picking fabrics, the standard wovens like linens or cottons or even polyester that is sort of a basic woven non-stretchy material, that's definitely a good place to start, as that material behaves very predictably, and you're not going to have to worry about it slipping in one direction and not the other, or having to use special needles because it's a knit. Things like that are definitely a consideration. But when you get into fabrics like a mushroom pleated satin, got a little scrap here of, this kind of fabric takes very specialized techniques to work with. And if you're just getting started in court garbing or garbing in any capacity where you're not using standard fabrics, don't jump right into the fancy fabrics. Don't try to do these right off the bat. You can definitely build up to them, but you want to have a certain comfort level with working with slippery materials and stretchy materials before you try to go there. Let's see, I'm going to check the handout. So the next question is generally like where to get fabrics for court garb. And if you're wanting to get really specific fabrics, like, okay, I want a beetle green silk, you're gonna have to go online probably. Most in-person fabric stores are geared towards quilting, which is great if you're looking for solid color cottons like most field garb is made out of. But if you're looking for the more specialty fabrics, or if you're looking for specific colors and textures and fiber content, you can occasionally find that stuff at in-person fabric stores. But going online is going to be your best bet if you really, really have a specific thing that you need for that project. The one caveat is if you're ever buying fabric online, definitely buy a swatch first. They're usually $1 or $2. Get it so that you can feel it and make sure it's the color you want and it's the feel that you want, and you're not going to be investing, you know, $100 in 5 yards of fabric that isn't what you wanted. If you're like me and you tend to build the project around the fabric available, life is a lot easier and a lot cheaper. Some of my standard fabric sources are thrift stores and yard sales. This is one of my favorite pieces of garb that I've ever made. It's a German 16th century style. And this lovely, lovely, heavy diamond patterned linen was a bedspread I got at a thrift store for like $5. So if you're willing to compromise a little bit and get creative and work with what is available, thrift stores and yard sales are fantastic sources of fabric. If you're just getting started, it definitely doesn't hurt to say, you know, hey guys, I'm starting garbing. Do any of you have fabric you want to get out of your stash? Because most of us who have been doing this for a while definitely have fabric that we've been meaning to do something with for a few years and have eventually given up and would happily give it to someone who's actually going to use it. So don't be afraid to ask. And IKEA is another one that I personally haven't used very much, but I hear that IKEA curtains and bedspreads and sheets and whatever tend to be really good for garb. So, and regardless of where you're getting fabric, whether it's new from the store or from a thrift store, if you're reusing old sheets or whatever, make sure you pre-wash fabric. This is garbing 101. Always wash your fabric, how you're going to wash the finished product. This is also a consideration when you're picking fabric, because field garb, obviously you have to launder it pretty much after every time you wear it, because you're fighting, you're getting sweaty and dirty and whatever, and you have to wash the garb frequently, which is why field garb is usually made out of standard, very washable fabrics like cottons and linens. When you get into fancier clothing with the court garb, you might be using silks or wools or just really picky synthetics. And you need to bear in mind that a lot of those fabrics are not as washable or is not as easily washable as standard cottons. Linen shrinks over time. Linen will shrink a little bit every time you wash it. So that's sort of just a consideration to have when you're using it. If you're talking about a big old tunic, the difference is not going to be noticeable. If you're talking about a very tightly fitted dress with a very long skirt, every time you wash it, you're gonna lose a 1/4 inch off the length of the skirt. So after a couple of years, that skirt is no longer long enough for you. One of the ways to circumnavigate that is just having layers in your garbing, which I'll talk more about later. Because if you have a shirt of any kind, a smock, a chemise, a slip, whatever you want to call it, under your fancy garb, that shirt is against your skin, and that's what's getting the most dirt and the most wear and tear, and that you can launder as often as you need and replace as necessary because it's cheap and simple, and it spares your fancy overgarb from needing to get laundered. If nothing else, you can just air it every once in a while and it should be good to go. So that's the last sort of consideration I'm going to go over with fabric for now. Patterns. So patterning is dear to my heart, but I understand that for most people it can be kind of intimidating. Figuring out where to start is sometimes tricky, and a lot of people will just start with a store-bought pattern. I got this one at Joann's. And store-bought patterns are a good starting point, especially if you're new to sewing in general and not just court garb. The only problem is they tend to be one size fits no one. So even if you're starting with a standard commercial bought pattern, I highly recommend that you go to the thrift store and get some sheets for a couple bucks, just throw away fabric, and cut out your pattern pieces on the scrap fabric, sew it together with nice big long stitches, and just try it on. Make sure that it fits close enough. If not, make a little note like, okay, move that out more here or take it in here. I really, really recommend never making a garment in nice fabric without having tested it in scrap fabric first. Some people will actually buy muslin for that purpose, as that's what muslin is sort of designed for. But muslin is expensive compared to thrift store sheets, so I generally recommend thrift store sheets. The next step up, if you want to really get more personal with the patterning, if you want to be starting the process yourself further back in the process, would be drafting. And this is just for a tank top I was making yesterday. But drafting is easiest on lined 1-inch paper. And drafting means that you're taking measurements off your own body and then using formulas and instructions to turn that into a paper pattern that you can then test. A lot of medieval, specifically clothing, is rectangular construction. So there's no actual shaping for bodies. It's just rectangle, rectangle, rectangle for the sleeves, rectangles under the arms, rectangles to give the body space, your basic T-tunic essentially. And that's a good place if you want to try to create patterns for yourself. That's a good starting point. It's just the rectangular construction for Viking clothing or early medieval. Once you're comfortable with drafting, you can move up to draping. Draping is hard to do yourself. It is much, much easier if you have a friend who can help you. But draping is essentially the art of just taking a big old piece of fabric and putting it against a human body and pinning it to another piece of fabric until it's the shape that you want, and then using that as your pattern. There's definitely all kinds of in-betweens in there. There are tons and tons and tons of instructions and tutorials and DIYs online for creating your own historical clothing patterns. A lot of them are drafting, as that's what a lot of people work from, especially if they're making clothing for someone who isn't physically there. So I can ask you, okay, give me your measurements and I will make a pattern and we can try it on you. But patterning is definitely where you're going to do the most defining of what you're making, because, you know, if you have a piece of linen, you can make just about anything, but the patterning is where you're deciding, okay, it has long sleeves, it has short sleeves, it has poofy sleeves, it has skinny sleeves. Whatever you're trying to do, the patterning is where you really take that inspiration that you started with and work on building it into something that is makeable. Let's see. Yeah, so that sort of covers the basics, the 101 of court garb. So you've got the design, the materials, and the construction. So I'm going to move on to talking about stuff that kind of takes it up a notch. So maybe the 102 class here. I'm going to take a breath here. I've been talking fast. Yeah. So the first thing that can take mediocre court garb into really nice court garb is definitely fit. Fit makes garb look good on a person. Some garb, especially looser fitting garb, it's pretty much interchangeable. If I can wear it, he can wear it, she can wear it, whatever. Court garb tends to be a little bit more involved with the more intricate patterning, sometimes more structured, and how the clothing fits the body that it's being worn by does a lot for how the piece of clothing itself is perceived. And I want to stress that fit does not mean tight. It can be if you're talking really nicely fitted doublets or really nicely fitted bodices. If it fits tightly correctly and in a flattering way for that body type, tight fit can look really nice, but that isn't the only thing I'm talking about. And I'm going to try to show you here. So this is one of my court garb outfits. And it's a basic tea tunic that a friend made. But what I do is I have a second belt to keep it tight around my waist rather than letting it poof out like it normally would down to the hips. And I have myself a big floofy red skirt that I wear underneath it. And it turns a basic tea tunic into court garb. And it's not a tightly fitted garment. It's still a tea tunic. But the fit is such that it looks nice. It looks like a loose garment that has been strategically belted to make it flatter this figure. And the skirt definitely helps. Oh, while I'm here, I was going to show you versatility is definitely a consideration when you're making garb. And this skirt is one of my favorite examples. It's basically a giant circle. And I can either wear it down like I'm wearing it on this side, or I sewed channels into the side with a drawstring that I can cinch up, which gives it this whole cool gathered look over on this side. So when you're making garb, you can definitely make it so it can be worn multiple ways to give you different options. In the handout, I have an image from the Hollow Crown series of the queen sitting on the throne, and she's got this big, beautiful, billowy dress on. And it is one of my favorite examples of how fit doesn't have to be tight. Loose drapes, strategic you know, lifts of the fabric where it could be most flattering is a great way to showcase artistic skill without a lot of technical sewing skill. Yeah, and considering the body type that the clothing is being built for is also important if you really want the garb to look great. I have a very slight, very straight frame. I don't have a lot of curves. I don't really have hips or a waist or anything like that, but I can fake it really well with garb. And pretty much any body type, there is a style of garb out there, either from history or from fantasy, that is built for your body type. My favorite example is Renaissance Italian. If you're talking Renaissance Italy, like 1600 to 1650, that entire dress style, these gorgeous silk court gowns, really only look right on really beautiful, full figures. But it runs the whole gambit. There is a style out there that suits you, I promise, male or female or anywhere in between. It's just a matter of experimenting on yourself and finding what you're comfortable with. It's a matter of looking for inspiration for people who look like you and seeing what looks good on them. And there are so many visual tricks out there in the world. The Victorians really kind of mastered the art, but it was around before then, of tricking the eye to see different shapes where there aren't really. So playing around with fit and playing around with what flatters and what looks good on you is going to be a journey, but it's going to be so, so worth it if you're really looking to up your garb game. Embellishments. So I have a little bit of a pet peeve around embellishments, and I love passing it on to people. So embellishments in Amtgard garb can be so much more than just applique. And I realize I'm sitting here saying this in an applique tunic, but I did not make this tunic. So some of the, just touching on the different options, there's trim, and that can be ribbons, lace, bands of brocade, anything that you can buy at the store and it comes in thin, long yardage and you can sew it to the edge of something is trim. And it can be used to really good effect. For example, on this German, all of the sleeves and cuffs and everything have this really wide metallic trim that looks really nice. Beads. I have seen some garb that had beading work done on it, and it was absolutely stunning. If you're looking for beading inspiration, I would definitely recommend looking at 1920s dresses, as the 1920s was kind of the peak of beading clothing, especially in European fashion specifically. Oh dear, it looks like I have been failing to admit people. I was too busy going on about my things here. All right, so to those who are just coming in, I'm sorry, I got distracted. I was forgetting to check the chat room. This is being recorded, so you guys can definitely check in later and see everything that you missed. And I dropped the link to the handout for this class, which I'm sort of trying to expand on rather than just reading, in the chat for this Zoom room, and I will be posting it with the recording of the video later. Again, sorry about that. Alrighty, where was I? All right, I was talking about embellishments and the different options that aren't just applique, because you're an Amtgard, you definitely know your resources for applique. All right, so we touched on trim, we touched on beads, embroidery. That one is getting more popular in Amtgard, which I think is awesome. And embroidery, just, it's so much to go over. I could do an entire class on it. But the basic idea is you're using colored thread to create designs on the fabric. And I just want to say that a lot of people, when they think of embroidery, they're thinking of like a really specific design that is a set picture that is being created in thread. And that is definitely an option, but it is not the only option. Specifically, looking at historical inspiration, embroidery on clothing was often just around, you know, the cuffs or the neckline or the hem of any piece of clothing, or it might just be embroidered stripes across the fabric. If you're looking for embroidery inspiration, first quarter 15th century European clothing had some really cool kind of geometric embroidery going on, that even if you're a beginner to embroidery can really add a lot to any piece of court garb. And definitely if you're crafting for A&S competitions, it can do a lot to show the judges like, oh yeah, they're doing hand embroidery, that's awesome. So definitely don't discount embroidery. Fabric painting is totally a thing. And if you are wanting to do a lot of embellishment onto fabric without taking the dozens or hundreds of hours it would take to embroider it, fabric painting is a great option. You can buy fabric paints at most craft stores. You can make fabric stamps if you want to do a repeating pattern on anything. And painting is basically a great non-garber way to really, really spice up some court garb, especially if you're using metallic paints. It can look so cool. All right. Applique, definitely an option. What amp garters tend to call applique is very much the machine applique, where you're using a machine set on a small zigzag stitch to attach one piece of fabric to another. But there's also hand appliquing, where you basically have your design piece and you actually fold the edges under and set it on your base fabric and hand stitch it down so that the stitching itself is not visible. And that is a historically accurate way to applique. And it's definitely, it's more, like I said, it's more historical. It looks cleaner typically. And it's definitely a way to wow judges if you're crafting court garb for competition. The last means of embellishment I'm going to touch on here is fabric manipulation. And this can be smocking, pleating. I've seen some really cool like origami-ish style fabric manipulation that is then put on garb or incorporated into it. Fabric manipulation can be so many different things, and it is so cool. You can either do it as part of the pleating of the garment itself, or to use like a standard ribbon and pleat it in a really fancy way to turn it into this really, really fancy trim. And there's more, like there's soutache embroidery, which is basically a cord that is curved into the shape and then just sewn down. Yeah, there's lots of different options for embellishment. Let's see. And accessories. Court garb is more than just the dress or the doublet or the robe or whatever it is you're making. Court garb is more than just the garment. Hats, scarves, specific belts that go with the outfit rather than just being, you know, your standard page belt or whatever. Gloves, fans, parasols, jewelry, even for guys. If you have like a big old livery collar or the right rings, jewelry can add so much to an outfit. Like I showed some folks earlier, the outfit that I'm wearing right now, if I were to just dumb it down, it's just a tunic. It's just your standard everyday fighter company tunic. But I'm me, so I've got my chain, I've got my scarf, I've got 2 belts on. I've got this really long green one that I'm using for all of the visual illusion of giving myself a waist. I've got my standard belt, and I've got a knife, and usually at events I've also got like my big straw hat, and I've got bracelets that go with the outfit and boots. And yeah, you can do so much with accessories. And accessories specifically also do a lot towards moving garb from costume to clothing. When you look at paintings or you look at movie stills or whatever your source of inspiration for your garb project is, I guarantee you that it's not just a single piece of clothing that is creating that look. There's more to it. There are veils, there are baldricks, there are all kinds of cool accessories that we can be adding to the main garb element to really pizzazz it up and really, really make it fancy. All right, so that's sort of the end of me talking at all of you rather excitedly. So if any of you have questions, I'm definitely open to answer them. And hopefully y'all will be able to watch the beginning of the video if you missed it. And again, I'm sorry about that. Any questions? Looks like someone messaged me.
I don't have a question, but I would like to say I did learn something new today.
Oh, good. Okay.
The wool actually was very helpful for a current project, so thank you for
Good.
that.
Yeah, wool is definitely one of my favorite materials to work with. It's so predictable. Like, it doesn't slip, it doesn't stretch in weird ways. I love working with wool. Unfortunately, it's really hard to find affordable wool in those lighter kind of tropical weights or the light suiting weights in any.
Actually, I need a heavier one because it's going to be the liner of a coat.
Oh, okay. You're using wool for the liner?
Yes, because the outside has to be a specific design and color. So
Okay.
I'm using the wool for the inside liner where it's going to be warm on me.
Gotcha. Okay, nice. Yeah, wool doesn't usually get used as a liner just because a lot of people have a skin sensitivity to it. But if you don't, that would totally work for that.
Yeah, I don't think I do. And besides, I'll probably be wearing long sleeves and stuff underneath it anyway.
That's fair. I generally recommend that if people are going to be wearing wool against their skin, that they test a small piece before investing in it. And random note for anyone that this might be relevant for, if you're using wool as an outer layer on a cloak or a coat or anything like that, you don't want to line it with an absorbent fabric like linen, because wool generally repels water pretty well. But if you line it with an absorbent material, it's going to wick the moisture through the wool onto your skin, which entirely defeats the purpose. And I learned that the hard way, so I'm trying to pass that on so no one else has to. Does anyone else have any questions? Anything they'd like more information on? If you all want to make sure you download the handout from the group chat here or from the Golden Veil page where I shared it, that definitely has external links at the end for more information and different places where you can find more information on court garb relevant information and topics.
I just shared a picture of the sketch of the coat that I'm doing.
Let's see if I can get it to open here. Oh, that looks fantastic. Very nice.
Yeah, and I've already made the outside, so that's already, what you see there is done. I just need to get the wool for the inside.
Okay, so you're going to be doing a bag lining in it then?
What's a bag lining?
So there's two different styles of lining. The one that you mostly see on modern jackets is called a bag lining, where you have the outer garment already constructed like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you basically make a mirror version out of the lining, and then you put it into the outside fabric and stitch it along the edges.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, yeah.
The other style of lining is called interlining, and it is so useful if you want to ever cheat the kind of fabric that you have.
Mm-hmm.
How interlining works is you have your pattern piece cut out in your outer fabric and your lining, and before you sew anything together, you put the lining next to your fashion fabric, And then you basically treat that double layer of fabric like it's one piece. So
Oh,
basically,
I call that cheat lining.
well, it's called interlining if you ever want to look it up online.
Yeah.
And the most fantastic use for interlining that I've ever found is if you have a lightweight fabric, like maybe a silk or a light brocade that you want to make it look like it's a heavy brocade, you
Yeah.
can take your fancy lightweight fabric and interline it with something heavier so it has that much heavier drape, but it will still act like it's an unlined piece of clothing.
It's like interfacing. You're using the fat liner as an interfacing
Sort of,
instead of
yeah.
a, yeah.
For
I think
example,
I've done that before. I just didn't know what it was called.
like this cloak right here,
Mm-hmm.
this blue brocade that I was using is actually very thin. And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't tell, I bought it online and I couldn't tell how thin it was. And I needed it to have this lovely, heavy, wide drape for the design of the piece. So what I did is I interlined it in a really heavy flannel.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
interlined it in the flannel to give it that drape, and then I ended up doing a bag lining in a polyester just to make it more wearable.
Yeah, I have done stuff like that before. Bracers, my archery bracers are made that way.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of the times I want to use a lightweight fabric, but I need the strength and this protection.
Yeah.
I need the protection, so I'll put something heavy on the inside and then I'll bag line it.
Yep.
I've done it before.
It is
Cool.
definitely a very, very useful technique to have in your arsenal as a garber.
So it was called, what was it called again?
Interlining.
Interlining.
I'll put
Okay.
it in the chat.
I gotta write that down. Apparently I've done it. I just didn't know what it was called.
And I'm pretty sure I talk about it at least a little bit in the handout as well. Alrighty. Anyone else have any questions? Any comments? Anything I forgot to touch on in court garb? Any projects that they'd like to share?
I sent a link directly to you with an article from a long time ago that I stumbled upon, just talking about layers and layers completing costumes more.
Yes, yes,
As a
layering
thing.
is awesome. Especially if you are going for a more of a historical bent, although Lord of the Rings is really good at layering too, so fantasy definitely factors in there. But for men and women and anything in between, layers can add versatility. For example, if you have a doublet with removable sleeves and a nice shirt, you can either wear the shirt by itself or the shirt with a doublet without the sleeves or with the sleeves, and you can get all kinds of different looks just from switching out different layers. Layers can also make a piece more wearable. I was talking about earlier where if your main court garb is made out of a fabric that isn't very washable, so silks or wools or just, anything with like sequins or anything metallic or shiny on it, typically those are dry clean only, so you don't want to launder them a lot. And if you build the outfit to have an underlayer of a very washable material like a cotton or a linen, then the undergarment, the chemise or the shift or the shirt, is saving the outer garment from the skin oils and the dirt and the wear and the tear that it would otherwise get if it was just sitting against your skin.
Yes.
Obviously, outer layers is a great way to layer if you've got, the main outfit and then you've got the slough coat and then a real coat and then a half cape. Like, there's so much you can do with layering for pretty much any situation. I will go back and touch on what I covered earlier in the class, which is natural fibers don't bake you. If you're going to be doing a lot of layering, please, please, please try to stick to linens and cottons so you don't die. Linen and cotton both wick moisture and help temperature regulate. Synthetics like polyester and nylon insulate, and you will die. So if you're layering, go with natural materials.
Abby Cox just did that video where it was like, let's compare the three of our friends wearing these three different garments and how ridiculously warm they're going to get in summer.
Yep. Yeah. And my costuming actually started doing pioneer reenactments in Nevada. So spending weekends outside wearing, chemise, corset, petticoat, full length, long sleeve dress, but it was all cotton. And I was always fine, but people never believed me, so. Right. I think we've got time for maybe one more question or a comment or topic. If anyone has something they'd like to jump in with. So I am generally available and quite happy to talk about all things garb if anyone ever wants to reach out to me about it. I have a Pinterest board that kind of got wildly out of control. um, so if you're ever looking for visual inspiration, I can definitely hook you up. And yeah, I do all kinds of sewing and garbing and embellishment. Chances are, if it has to do with costuming or clothing or fiber arts, I at least know someone who knows the answer to whatever question you might have. So thank you all so much for coming to this, and I will try to get this video uploaded for any of you who missed the beginning or who missed it entirely as soon as I can. And I hope you all had a chance to grab the handout, as that covers most of the basics that I went over here today. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you. Yay.
Bye.
Thank you.